Derek rested his back against the edge of the kitchen counter, gripping his coffee mug with a kind of desperation, as though it were the last solid thing keeping him grounded. Rain tapped lightly on the window panes, a distant, hollow sound that did nothing to soothe the unrest churning within him. His eyes followed the slow motion of the coffee's surface, but his thoughts had already drifted far, caught in the growing storm of dread that had crept into every corner of his life. The quiet inside the house felt heavier than the weather outside, thick, oppressive, unrelenting. He sensed it like a low hum in his chest. Something had changed. Melissa had grown distant, her presence more ghost than partner, moving through the days as if she belonged to another world entirely. He couldn't recall the exact moment the distance had started, only that the connection they once shared had splintered into something unrecognizable. The warmth they'd nurtured, the closeness, the laughter, it had all faded, leaving behind a stranger wearing the face of the woman he loved. And now, he felt the weight of an impending revelation, one he hadn't dared to fully imagine until tonight. The sharp sound of heels against hardwood broke the stillness, jolting Derek from his trance. Melissa stepped into the room with practiced elegance, her focus absorbed by the phone in her hand. She didn't acknowledge him, didn't even glance in his direction, or maybe she simply chose not to. The sheer detachment in her demeanor struck him like a slap, a brutal confirmation of just how far apart they had grown. "I'm heading out," she said coolly, eyes never leaving the screen, her tone as casual as if she were noting the weather. The words hovered between them like smoke, heavy and foreboding. Derek blinked, momentarily stunned by her indifference. "Where are you going?" he asked softly, his voice unsteady, threaded with the unease he'd tried so hard to suppress. At last, she lifted her gaze. Their eyes locked for a moment, and the chill that passed through him was unmistakable. Her smile, faint, distant, was devoid of warmth, carefully constructed. Derek's chest tightened as unease twisted itself into something colder, something sharper. "I'm staying with Charles tonight," she said, each word delivered with deliberate precision, like knives placed gently on a table. Her voice was void of emotion, as if what she said bore no consequence at all. The breath caught in his lungs. He recognized the name. Charles. Someone he'd seen now and then, a familiar face from the club, a topic in idle conversation. Nothing had ever seemed unusual, but now, with her speaking his name like a declaration, something inside Derek crumbled. Charles. That name suddenly carried a weight it never should have. Derek stood frozen, struggling to comprehend the enormity of what she'd just said, grasping for something to hold on to in the rising tide of disbelief. "What are you talking about?" he asked, voice cracking beneath the strain. "You're staying with him? Why?" His words shook with shock more than anger, though both boiled beneath the surface. Melissa's face remained unreadable, her expression disturbingly composed. If anything, she seemed detached, uninterested in his reaction. "Charles makes me feel alive," she said simply, as though it were a self-evident truth, something that needed no further explanation. The statement burned through him. Alive. The word echoed in his head like a cruel accusation. "He gives me something real," she continued, her voice even, almost tired. "Something I haven't felt with you in a long time. Something different." Derek's head reeled. His wife, his partner of 5 years, was standing before him, calmly laying bare the truth he'd refused to face. That she had found something beyond their marriage. That whatever they had once shared no longer meant anything to her. His heartbeat thudded wildly, his breathing uneven. "We're married," he managed, voice barely holding together. "Doesn't that mean anything to you anymore?" Melissa didn't flinch. Her arms crossed in front of her, her features cold and unmoved. "I stopped caring a long time ago," she replied with cutting finality. "I've been living with a ghost. I want more than this, more than you. Charles gives me that. A flush of heat rushed to Derek's face. He could feel his control slipping, his hands beginning to shake. Rage and grief collided like thunder inside him. "This is crazy," he muttered, almost to himself. "You're throwing away everything we built. For what? Some affair with a guy from the club?" She sneered at him then, a twisted little grin full of scorn. The derision in her gaze was unmistakable. "An affair?" she echoed, taking a step towards him, and her words were as sharp as shards of glass. "Do you think it's just about intimacy? I'm tired of living your safe, predictable life, Derek. I'm tired of pretending. I want something real, something exciting. And it sure as hell isn't you." Her voice was a wrecking ball, smashing through the remnants of their relationship, the last fragile hopes he had clung to. Derek felt the floor slipping from beneath him, the world spinning out of focus. Everything they had created, every shared memory, every whispered promise, it all felt meaningless in the face of her apathy. He couldn't speak. His throat was too tight, full of hurt, of questions he couldn't bring himself to ask. He wanted to plead, to rage, to demand an explanation, but all he could do was stand there as the weight of her betrayal crushed him. "This marriage ended a long time ago," Melissa said with eerie calm, each syllable hammering into his chest. "You were just too weak to see it." And in that moment, Derek understood. She wasn't trying to wound him anymore. She didn't need to. Because the truth was worse, she didn't care at all. And that, more than anything, was what broke him. He'd seen the warning signs, the way she had become cold, the increasing number of nights she stayed late at the office, the way their closeness had quietly eroded. Still, he chose denial, clinging to the hope that it was just a phase. Now, she stood before him, ending their marriage with the ease of canceling a dinner reservation. "Unbelievable," Derek murmured, his voice strained with a mix of grief and fury. "We created a whole life together, Melissa, and now you're just throwing it away. For some stranger?" Melissa moved a step closer, shrinking the distance between them. Her eyes were like frozen glass, stripped of empathy. "None of that means anything to me anymore," she said coldly, her tone as sharp as broken glass. "I'm done with this life. I'm done with you. I want something else. I want to feel alive again, and you never gave me that," she added, her words cutting through him like a knife. A crushing pressure tightened around Derek's chest, the impact of her words deeper than anything he'd known. He had always been the anchor, reliable, steady, the one who kept things from falling apart. But now, she didn't see him as essential. He was just part of the background. "Fine," he said quietly, the fire in him dimming into embers. "If you walk out that door tonight, don't bother coming back." She paused for a moment, like she was weighing her options. For an instant, Derek imagined he saw something flicker in her expression. Was it hesitation? A glimmer of guilt? If it existed at all, it vanished in a blink. She gave a smirk laced with disdain, her gaze gleaming with finality. "You think I care?" she said, her head tilting slightly. "I'll live however I please, and I won't waste a second thinking about you." Then she turned and walked away, her footsteps echoing down the hall like a closing chapter. Derek remained still in the kitchen, his hands clutching the countertop as if it were the only thing keeping him grounded. Upstairs, he could hear her collecting her belongings, drawers opening, bags being zipped. She wasn't bluffing. This wasn't an argument that would pass. She was truly leaving, and in that moment, a brutal truth settled over him. Nothing about his life would ever return to what it was. Moments later, the front door slammed shut. She was gone. The silence that followed was thunderous. Derek stayed there, unmoving, staring at the empty space where she had stood. His pulse pounded, but what stirred inside him wasn't grief. It was rage, pure and unfiltered. For the first time in his life, Derek felt unbound, like the rules no longer applied. The quiet that now filled the house was suffocating. He didn't move, still staring at the entryway as though she might suddenly come back. But she wouldn't. She had been his partner in everything, his closest companion. And she had left without a second glance. It wasn't her absence that cut the deepest. It was her apathy. Her utter lack of remorse scorched more than any goodbye could have. That's when the fury solidified, cold and sharp-edged. This wasn't just heartbreak. This was betrayal. And betrayal demanded a response. Derek had always prided himself on his composure, logical, even-tempered, someone who navigated conflict with a clear mind. But not anymore. This was a different kind of storm. She had crossed a line, one he couldn't overlook. And now he would act. Pain wasn't enough. Anger wasn't enough. She had chosen destruction. So would he. But his retaliation wouldn't be loud or reckless. No, his vengeance would be precise, calculated. It would unfold slowly, relentlessly, and she would feel every ripple of it. Derek already knew where he would start. With Charles, the man who had crept into their lives, the one she turned to for excitement, for escape. Charles had taken something irreplaceable, and Derek would not let that go unanswered. But he wouldn't strike without purpose. He wasn't interested in chaos. He would dismantle Charles from within, quietly, surgically. It would start subtly, almost imperceptibly. No one would trace it back to him. But piece by piece, Charles's carefully constructed life would unravel. Derek's opening move was simple. Dig. He had always had a gift for analysis, for spotting hidden patterns. His years in tech had sharpened those instincts. Now, he'd weaponize them. Charles's world was a house of cards, and Derek intended to pull the base from under it. Hours passed as he hunched over his desk, the computer's glow casting deep shadows across his face. His hands moved quickly over the keyboard, searching, probing. He scoured everything: social media, business records, personal posts, financial databases. No boundary existed anymore. The first lead emerged quickly. Charles held a collection of real estate holdings, nothing extravagant, but enough to generate steady income. Derek cataloged every property, every financial detail, and stored them away for later use. He understood systems. He knew that every system, no matter how secure, had weak spots. Charles's life would be no exception. Charles had always been that effortless charmer, the magnetic guy with the easy smile and endless confidence. He was the type to draw a crowd, to flourish in the spotlight. But Derek would make sure the spotlight turned harsh and unforgiving. He combed through photo after photo, Charles laughing at parties, posing with the right people, the picture of charm and success. Then he found it. One image froze him. Charles and Melissa, seated together at an upscale rooftop bar. Their hands touched in a way that needed no explanation. Their closeness was unmistakable, too intimate. Derek's chest burned, but he smothered the flare of emotion. This wasn't the time for feelings. This was the time for precision. He shifted his focus to Charles's finances. At a glance, the business looked solid, profitable. But Derek's trained eyes picked out discrepancies, small, suspicious inconsistencies in transactions that hinted at something deeper. And those were the cracks he would exploit. Nothing overtly catastrophic had happened, at least, not yet. But Derek was well aware that all it would take was a single well-placed push for minor faults to fracture into something far worse. Quietly, he began making untraceable calls to Charles's clients, dropping vague implications of misconduct in his financial dealings. He wasn't interested in triggering a landslide. He let the whispers ripple outward in silence. Timing was everything. If events spiraled too quickly, Charles might catch on. So Derek allowed suspicion to fester slowly, letting uncertainty infect Charles's career like a dormant illness biding its time. Meanwhile, Melissa was already stepping into the snare Derek had carefully laid. He had drained every penny from their joint accounts, funneling the funds into an account solely under his control. The woman who had spent so freely, never questioning her access, found herself abruptly and completely cut off. Though the house was still in both their names, Derek had already initiated legal maneuvers to dissolve her claim to it. As he examined the updated balances, a cold smile tugged at his lips. This was only the beginning. Melissa had always been obsessed with appearances, how others perceived her, the flawless image she worked so hard to maintain. Derek's plan was simple: dismantle that illusion piece by piece. He started crafting anonymous messages, emails, rumors, carefully planted comments, all designed to tarnish her pristine reputation. Not to destroy her overnight, but to allow her image to decay slowly, until the picture-perfect life she cherished crumbled into ashes. Over the following weeks, Derek remained in the background, his work quiet and methodical. Charles's business began to falter. One deal failed, then another. Clients started distancing themselves. Murmurs about financial irregularities grew louder. At the same time, Melissa began to feel the consequences close in around her. She reached out to Derek, panicked and pleading, but he met her desperation with nothing but silence and indifference. Her distress didn't move him. She had made her bed, abandoning him for a fantasy with Charles. Now reality was tearing through that illusion. Every day, her frustration and fear deepened as the life she once had slipped further from reach. One morning, she opened her banking app and froze. The account was empty. Everything she'd relied on had vanished. Panic surged through her as she frantically called Derek again and again. He never answered. Lost and desperate, she turned to Charles. When he finally picked up, his voice was hollow, distant. "Melissa, I've got my own disaster to handle," he said quietly. "Clients are disappearing. I don't have the bandwidth for your issues right now." Her stomach dropped. She had believed she was moving toward something better. Instead, everything around her was unraveling. No money, no foundation, and now Charles, the man she had staked everything on, was falling apart too. She ended the call and sat in stunned silence, the crushing weight of isolation pressing in. Elsewhere, Derek leaned back in his chair, the faint satisfaction of a plan unfolding exactly as intended washing over him. In the stillness, he could almost hear Melissa's panic echoing in the silence of her unanswered call. She never thought he'd retaliate like this. But that's who Derek was. He didn't forget betrayal, and he certainly didn't forgive it. He would make sure they both paid their due. As the days blurred into weeks, Charles's collapse accelerated. Rumors turned into full-blown accusations, and his clients vanished entirely. His once stellar reputation lay in tatters, and he couldn't understand how everything had gone so wrong. From afar, Derek watched the chaos build, each new disaster stoking his sense of righteous retribution. Melissa's world was breaking apart too. She had no job, no money, and her social network had grown cold. Former friends now treated her like a scandal, and the glossy version of her life she once flaunted felt like a distant memory. She was adrift, financially ruined, emotionally isolated, and she couldn't even explain how it had all gone wrong. She had walked away from Derek believing something brighter lay ahead. But now, that choice haunted her. One night, sitting alone in a dim apartment, the pieces began to come together. Could Derek have orchestrated all of this? Could he have been behind the disintegration of both her life and Charles's? There was no solid evidence, but the precision, the synchronicity, it was too deliberate to ignore. The suspicions settled deep in her mind and refused to leave. While Melissa wrestled with suspicion, Derek was quietly finishing the final act. Charles had been arrested. Charges of embezzlement and tax fraud had caught up with him. The case was airtight, every detail flawlessly constructed. Derek had ensured it. The plan had worked without flaw. Sitting in his new home, Derek felt the old fury that once consumed him fade into a cool, satisfied calm. This hadn't just been about revenge, it was about reclamation. He had taken back everything they'd tried to steal from him. Carefully, Methodically, he had rewritten the ending to their story. Now, as he gazed out the window at the quiet world beyond, he knew the final chapter had closed. Charles was in prison. Melissa was alone. And Derek, he had rebuilt from the wreckage they left behind. At last, with everything in place, Derek could breathe again. He could begin anew. He was waiting for her. Seconds felt like an eternity. She said, "I'll be just a minute," and then vanished. The whole apartment was screaming her name, her favorite dress, the wine, the candles. But she was gone. And then came that message, the one that shattered his entire world. How do you survive betrayal when you've given everything to love? What do you do when forever turns into never? This story hits like a punch to the heart. But the worst part is still ahead. You'll want to know how it all ends. Hello, my friend. I'm so glad you stopped by my channel. If it's your first time here, don't forget to subscribe and like this video, as every like truly inspires me. Please tell me which city and country you watched this video from. Now let's get started. Joshua lingered by the window, his hands restless as his gaze cut through the inky darkness outside. Tonight was meant to be perfect. He had planned everything down to the smallest detail, an intimate anniversary dinner just for the two of them. The table was carefully set with her favorite meals, the flickering candlelight casting soft shadows across the room, and a bottle of wine stood untouched, waiting for the right moment. Even her beloved dress, the one that never failed to light up her face, was laid out for her. But something had gone wrong. The air in the apartment had grown thick with silence, stretching unbearably with each second that passed. Riley had excused herself briefly, claiming she'd only be a moment in the bathroom. That was 15 minutes ago. A knot tightened in Joshua's stomach as he checked his watch. He called her name, expecting her to emerge with a playful jab at his impatience, but the only response was the hollow quiet of the apartment. A chill crept down his spine. He hesitated, staring at the bathroom door, his pulse quickening with an unshakable sense of unease. Maybe she had simply lost track of time. Maybe. But deep inside, he knew something was off. His heart pounded as he reached for the doorknob, his grip uncertain. He pushed the door open, bracing himself for the sight of her, but the room was empty. A wave of confusion hit him like a crashing tide. Where was she? Then, a faint noise from the living room yanked him out of his spiraling thoughts. His phone vibrated. He snatched it up and read the message from Danny, an old friend. The words on the screen sent his world shattering into pieces. "Joshua, I hate to be the one to say this, but Riley's not coming back tonight. She's with Noah." The words struck him like a hammer blow. Noah Mitchell, the golden boy. The man who had everything, wealth, status, charisma, and now he had Riley. Joshua's legs nearly gave out beneath him. No, this couldn't be real. She wouldn't do this. His mind raced, searching for a logical explanation. Had he been blind to the warning signs? When had things begun to unravel? The realization pressed down on him, suffocating. How could she betray him like this? His eyes stayed locked on the message, his body frozen in place. Why hadn't she told him? Why had she chosen to leave like this? His breath grew shallow and his vision blurred. Anger surged through him, hot and raw. With a sudden, violent motion, he hurled his phone against the counter. She was gone. She had chosen to walk away. He dialed her number, his fingers shaking. The phone rang and rang. Each time, it went straight to voicemail. No answer, no explanation. Just an unbearable silence that echoed through the apartment, louder than any scream. The silence spoke volumes. It spoke of deception, of choices made without him, of love that had slipped through his fingers without warning. He no longer knew where she was, and worse, he no longer knew where he stood. His breath came in shallow, uneven bursts as he grabbed his coat, his movements mechanical, his mind drowning in the weight of what had just unraveled. He needed answers, no matter how much they hurt. He couldn't just sit here, swallowed by the stillness of the home they had built together. Stumbling out the door, the cold night air wrapped around him, but it did nothing to numb the chaos churning inside him. Riley wouldn't just vanish, not after everything they had shared. But Noah was different. Noah was the kind of man who made things happen, who took what he wanted without hesitation. And now, he had taken her. Joshua had always been the steady one, working his 9 to 5, coming home to his wife, trying his best to keep their life together. Now, that life was unraveling before his eyes. The deafening quiet of the apartment had been replaced by a relentless ringing in his ears. The world around him blurred, distant and surreal, as though he were merely an observer watching his own downfall unfold. He had no destination, no plan. His feet moved out of instinct, but his mind remained trapped in the moment when Danny's message had turned his reality inside out. How had they come to this? Their love had once been effortless, natural, something that didn't require second-guessing. He could still picture the way she had looked at him when they first met, the brightness in her eyes, the way she laughed without restraint, the endless conversations that flowed as if they had known each other forever. He had never envisioned a day when she would simply disappear. Yet here he was, standing at the ruins of their love, watching it crumble before him. When had it all shifted? She had changed, and so had he. Life had thrown responsibilities at them, one after another, until they had become weighed down by the sheer pressure of it all. There had been a time when every detail of their day had been shared, when the smallest touches and glances carried meaning. But that time had slipped away, gradually, then all at once. Joshua had allowed himself to get lost in the routine, in the grind of everyday life. He had overlooked the subtle cries for attention, the moments when she had reached out, hoping he would notice. And now, it was too late. Now, he was alone, left to face the wreckage of what he had failed to see. His stomach twisted at the thought of Noah, the man who had everything, the man who had just taken the one thing Joshua had never thought he would lose. Joshua had never questioned Riley's devotion, at least not until now. For as long as he could remember, she had always been his, returning to him at the end of each day. But suddenly, an uneasy suspicion took root in his mind. Had Riley found in Noah something she hadn't realized she was missing? Was he everything Joshua wasn't? Was he the kind of man who could take her away? His phone vibrated in his hand. A message from Riley. Joshua, I'm sorry. Hurting you was never my intention. I just needed tonight. I needed to feel alive again. That last word hit him like a punch to the gut. Alive. What was she trying to say? That being with Noah made her feel something he no longer could? His fingers tightened around the phone, his pulse hammering. For a moment he was tempted to hurl the device into the street, to rid himself of the message as if that would erase its meaning. But instead, he forced himself to respond, his hands shaking as he typed. You don't get to do this. You don't get to walk away and then say sorry. It doesn't work that way. He hit send and shoved the phone into his pocket, his chest rising and falling with uneven breaths. The city stretched before him, lights flickering in the distance, but they seemed duller somehow, like stars on the verge of burning out. He had no clear direction, no sense of where to go, only the certainty that he couldn't stay here. Not while his world was crumbling around him. It felt unreal, like he was trapped in a dream he couldn't shake himself awake from. His mind looped through the same painful realization. The woman he had promised forever to had chosen to spend the night with someone else. And there was nothing he could do about it. His phone buzzed again. This time, a call from Danny. Joshua hesitated before answering. Joshua. Danny's voice was steady but urgent. I know this hurts, but listen to me. Riley didn't mean for this to happen. Joshua's stomach twisted into a knot. She's confused. Danny continued. And Noah, he has this way of making people feel like they matter. Just give her some time to figure things out. Joshua shook his head, even though Danny couldn't see him. Time? He repeated bitterly. She already made her choice, Danny. She's with him right now, not me. How do I come back from that? Joshua, Stop. Joshua cut him off, his voice tight with frustration. Don't make excuses for her, or for him. Right now, they're together, and I'm standing here wondering what happened to my wife. Without another word, he ended the call. His hands trembled as he shoved the phone back into his pocket, his emotions threatening to drown him. The cold night air wrapped around him, but it wasn't enough to numb the ache in his chest, the deep, hollow pain of knowing he had lost something vital, something he had taken for granted. And in that moment, he understood. He wasn't just angry, he wasn't just heartbroken, he was terrified. Terrified of what came next. Terrified of the unknown. Would Riley return? Would she even want to? Or had Noah, effortless, charming Noah, already won? Joshua stood motionless, staring at the distant glow of the city as his thoughts stormed within him. The air carried a bitter chill, but the shiver running through him had little to do with the temperature. It was the realization settling deep into his bones, that everything was unraveling and he was powerless to stop it. His mind drifted backward, replaying the last few months in excruciating detail. All the moments he had ignored, the subtle ways Riley had withdrawn, the way her laughter had faded, her touch had become less frequent, signs he had missed, warnings he had brushed aside in the rush of daily life. He had believed they were unshakable. He had been wrong. Now all that remained was the wreckage, and he was left sifting through the pieces, trying to understand where it had all gone wrong. His phone screen still glowed with Riley's message. I just needed tonight to feel alive again. He kept rereading those words, searching for some explanation, some way to make sense of them. Had he truly been so absent? So disconnected that she had to turn to someone else just to feel something again? His thoughts shifted to Noah, the golden boy, the magnetic presence, the kind of man who drew people in effortlessly. Joshua had always prided himself on being the steady one, the reliable one. But somewhere along the way, that hadn't been enough for Riley. Predictability had lost its charm. She had wanted something else, something wild, something untamed, and he had been too blind to see it until it was too late. A fresh wave of frustration burned through him. This wasn't something that had happened overnight. It had been unraveling for months, maybe even longer, and he had let it happen, oblivious, convinced that their love was indestructible. But it wasn't. Nothing was. And now he wasn't even sure if Riley wanted to fix it. His phone vibrated again. Riley's name filled the screen, but this time he felt no rush of hope, only a sinking certainty. With a deep breath, he answered, his pulse pounding, not with anticipation, but with something far worse. A suffocating weight hung in the air, thick with unspoken words and shattered trust. Joshua. Riley's voice wavered, barely more than a whisper. I know you're angry. I know you're in pain. But I never wanted to hurt you. I swear. Her words did nothing to ease the storm inside him. If anything, they stoked the fire. You didn't mean to hurt me, he echoed, disbelief laced in every syllable. Riley, you've been tearing me apart for months, and I was too blind to see it. You've been slipping away, and I just stood there, pretending everything was fine. A hollow, bitter laugh escaped him, heavy with the weight of realization. How did we end up like this? How did I miss all the signs? Please, Joshua, just listen. No. The word cut through the space between them, sharper than he intended, but he didn't care. He had listened, again and again, waiting for things to change, hoping for something real, but nothing had. You made your choice, Riley, and I refuse to be your backup plan. She parted her lips to respond, but he stopped her before she could even begin. No, you don't get to walk away and then turn around like nothing happened. You don't get to leave me in the dark and expect me to be here when you decide you're ready. Silence stretched between them, the static on the line the only sound. Then, a shaky breath, a quiet sob. A part of him ached to reach for her, to soften just enough to take away the pain. But the betrayal was too much. It burned, consuming everything else until there was nothing left but anger and grief. I don't even know what to say, she admitted, her voice barely holding together. I wasn't thinking, Joshua. I never wanted this. I never planned for it. Her voice cracked, then softened to something almost fragile. But Noah, he made me feel seen, like I mattered. Her confession struck like a knife to the gut. His hands curled into fists as a sharp wave of frustration crashed over him. And I didn't? His voice shook, but he refused to stop. I was here, Riley. I was building a life with you, trying to give us everything we dreamed of. And you threw it all away. For what? A fleeting thrill? A temporary escape? She sniffled, her sorrow a quiet tremor over the line. I'm sorry. I never meant for this to happen. I never wanted to hurt you. But Joshua had already stopped listening. He realized in that moment that no amount of apologies or explanations could undo what had been done. She had made her choice, and now all that remained were the ruins. I don't think I can forgive you, he admitted, the words tasting like ash. I don't even know if I can look at you the same way. Another stretch of silence. He could hear her muffled sobs, but they no longer reached him. He had built a wall around himself, high, impenetrable, and he had no strength left to break it down. Not for her. Not anymore. I don't want this to be the end, Joshua. Her desperation clung to every word. Please, I'll do whatever it takes. Just give me a chance. Let me fix this. For a fleeting moment, he wanted to believe her, wanted to convince himself that love was enough to piece them back together. But deep down, he knew better. Trust, once shattered, rarely mended, and without it, what was left? His chest tightened as he forced out the words, I'm done, Riley. His voice was steady now, distant, cold. You can't fix this. Not anymore. Before she could respond, he ended the call. The finality of it hit him hard, knocking the breath from his lungs. And yet, beneath the devastation, something else stirred. Relief. He had no idea what came next, no clear path forward. But one thing was certain. He couldn't stay in the wreckage of their love any longer. It was time to move on, to rebuild somehow. The pain wouldn't vanish overnight. He knew that. But somewhere beneath the heartbreak, he understood one undeniable truth. Leaving was the only way to find himself again. And that, above everything else, was the hardest part of all. This story has come to an end. Sometimes we get so caught up in daily life that we stop noticing the people beside us. Love is not just about beautiful moments. It's about effort, attention, and care. Betrayal rarely happens out of nowhere. It grows from silence and neglect. This story reminds us all, if someone matters to you, don't forget to show it every day. Don't wait until it's too late. Learn to speak, to listen, to forgive. Because love doesn't die from fights, it dies from silence. Cherish each other, because losing someone is easy, but getting them back is almost impossible. What's your opinion? Share it in the comments, my friend. And if you liked this story, check out other exciting videos on my channel. I'll say goodbye until the next video. See you.